Right, hi folks, how are we all doing? Now, this is a case that I have mentioned a couple of times, but we've not really gone into it in any great detail. Now, the criminal proceedings are due to start, I believe, in January now, because I don't think the other one in this, and there's so many parts of this, we're not even anywhere near her. Laurie Vallow, as much as she wanted right to speedy trial, it doesn't look like she's going to get that as the trials are joined. So it looks like January that this is all going to kick off. It's a horrific case. So he was like a religious person who went weirdo. No good comes of this. Also, oddly enough, and we'll get into this as these uploads go along, and there is going to be lots and lots of them. When Nutter meets Nutter, and it all goes horribly wrong. Oddly enough, had a thing about zombies. I know. So this is the very early days. Now, he used to have these Preparing the People podcasts and End Times, and he wrote a load of mad books and stuff like that. Awful. Absolutely awful. So these are really difficult to find, these uploads, because obviously anyone who had these nutters on their podcast, when this all kicked off, quickly removed them, as you would. But they're still kicking around, but they're just really not that easy to find. So it's taken me forever to try and get genuine audio. So here we go. This is him on one of these podcasts. The audio is not great on this because I believe he must be on his mobile phone or something like that. And he's going to take us right back to his early days as to when this madness all sort of started.
I chose patience because in 1985, when I was almost 17 years old, I was almost 18, I went on a camping trip with a young man to Flaming Gorge Reservoir in northern Utah, and they were kind of a group of daredevils, but I was always kind of the guinea pig, and they'd send me out to test out any dangerous stunts they wanted to do.
So he was the idiot. He was the idiot out of his group of friends. How do you go from being so easily led to a pretty much full-on murderous cult leader?
And so one of them was to jump off a 60-foot cliff on the shoreline of Flaming Gorge.
I think I remember hearing about this one. Keep going, though.
Okay.
So at 17 years old, he jumped off of a cliff. Okie doke. Could have saved a lot of innocent lives if it would have all just have finished there.
And I foolishly agreed to do so. And I finally jumped off that ledge, and it just seemed like forever that I was falling, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I finally hit the surface of the water, but it was like hitting concrete. And it felt like my body went deeper than my spirit. And so, in a way, my spirit kind of popped out of my head, and it didn't go all the way out, but it was enough that as I looked around, I saw a vast plain of white light, and it just felt very peaceful and spiritual, and it was like little bits of white light clung to my spirit, and that only lasted a few seconds, but it changed my whole life, and I consider that a near-death experience, about as close as you can get to actually dying.
Sounds like it.
Well, I surfaced, and my friends said I'd been under the water long enough that they were panicked I'd drowned, but that was my last cliff jump I've really ever done.
What a shock.
Yeah, I bet.
But why that ties into patience is because before that I had been just really into sports, but I was never one of the best athletes. My friends always were. So it was just, always kind of that climb to be on the team and get some playing time. So.
Oh my God. He was the last to be picked kid. Okay, he was the last to be picked kid, and that's probably why they used him as the crash test bunny for the cliff jump, because he was one of these people that wanted to be part of something but really wasn't. Okay.
Patience throughout my teenage years was really tied to that, and then it just but that near-death experience changed me in a way that I had a lot more understanding of what this life is about. After that, I gave up sports. I didn't really care about that as much anymore, and changed my perspective. Went on an LDS mission to New Jersey, and that was 2 years of tests and patience. New Jersey, Spanish speaking, right in the ghettos.
Oh boy.
Every day was a new adventure. And when I returned home, I got married and had a child, but then I went on a family vacation to La Jolla Cove, San Diego area, in California, with my parents and my wife and son. And that is where I had a second near-death experience. What happened, I was out on...
So is he just that, well, we know he's the world's dumbest man. 2 near-death experiences. Okay, that's where I don't know how many we get up to in this. How many near-death experiences he's actually had. Who else was telling us about the near-fatal car accidents that he miraculously walked free from? On
a rocky point at that cove, and I just shouldn't have been out there. The tide started coming in, and then what they call a rogue wave just blasted me. I looked straight up as I was looking for shells on this rocky point, and this wave was about 20 feet above me, and it just...
This fella needs to keep away from water. Or actually, no, he should never have kept away from water. He should have just drowned himself.
Crushed me. I felt a voice say, "Get down, grab onto the rock." And so I just held on, and it still tore me away. And suddenly I found myself just standing upright. It felt like I was standing in an orange light. And I looked to the right up above me, and I saw my grandpa, Keith, who had died before I was even born, and his grandpa, Finity, and they seemed to be in a hurry, like they knew they had a short time to talk to me is all.
So it just sounds like kind of like just an awareness of who they are all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's like I knew who they were exactly. And Grandpa Keith said, I need to show you some things that will pertain to your future. And so suddenly he started, it was like a video screen opened up, kind of like you see in futuristic movies with 16 or 24 screens.
And they were all like those holographic screens, right?
Yeah. And looked just lifelike. I could see myself.
Do you know what is interesting here? I wonder if he whacked his head, like, on both of those impacts. Because a lot of these people that go on to be, like, really terrible people, red rummers, it's YouTube, isn't it? You have to be so careful what you say. They've had head injuries. I'm not aware the same applies for Laurie Fellow, rather.
In a lot of the scenes, and he said there will come a time where you need to write books regarding your children's futures. And as I mentioned, I only had the one child.
I don't think we've got any fear of that with Wayne Fox. For you.
At the time, but in those videos I could tell that I had 5 children, and just all of this awareness kind of came to me, and shown quite a bit about their futures. And so after about a minute, Grandpa Finity seemed to be watching my body. So while I was standing there in the orange room, my physical body was getting beat up and thrashed by the waves. Rolling through the rocks. And he kind of indicated that if I didn't get back in my body soon, I wasn't going to.
Yeah,
so
sounds like it.
I kind of cut our little meeting short. And suddenly I felt myself back inside my body, and I just suddenly felt intense pain. I was just chopped up. My back looked like hamburger, and
Ouch.
got to my chin, and where I'd held onto that rock, it had ripped off all my fingerprints and everything were gone.
Oh my goodness. That's like, it's like, yeah, you better get back in there, but it's like, but I don't want to go.
Yeah.
Probably looked a bit like a zombie.
If I had a choice, I probably would not have done that. My parents and my wife took me to the hospital and got me all stitched up and everything. But I didn't really tell them what had happened during that incident. I actually held off a few days. You know, the Mormon culture. I didn't necessarily want to say, oh, I'm not God.
Yeah, you don't want to like, what on earth? Are you sure?
Uh-huh. And so when you have a near-death experience like that and you're shown scenes, the hard part is it feels so immediate. It feels like you're going to experience that within months. And that was in
Around this time, oddly enough, he was a grave digger.
1994. So I'm still waiting for most of those scenes to actually happen, but some have started to happen. And patiently waiting to see that all unfold.
Wow. Well, the Lord's timing is different, I guess, with the way they would say, right? So. Right. Wow. No, it's interesting that you mentioned that kind of perspective of patience tonight, because before we started recording here too, like I was mentioning, like what's happening with my wife in the hospital right now, and like she's been through just so much, and she's so tough about it. But when it comes to patience, it's funny. I was talking to a missionary who had served here in our ward a while ago, and I shout out to Alicia Homestead if you listen to this after we're done here. I had told her, it's interesting that I'm talking about patience tonight, because today I am not feeling patient with the doctors. So, you mentioned like that many years waiting for something. I'm like, okay, well, we've been married 10 years, and you've been waiting a lot longer for some things to happen. So I'm like, okay, well, this will be good for me too then.
Yeah.
So, wow. So the first question for you, then, thanks for introducing that. That's a really good place to start. So can you give anything specific, like one time in your life, like kind of a specific time where you had to exercise like the most patience, where it was maybe like particularly difficult for you, but when you did, like in that one instance, like the results were
I mean, you can see here, this is a plug for one of his many, many books. That's why he's on this podcast.
particularly liberating for you that you can recall.
Okay. After college at BYU, I graduated in journalism, and I got a job at the Ogden Standard Examiner. I always felt it was temporary and that I had a different direction in life to go, and I felt it was tied to the books that I'd write in the future. So that was a tough situation, because the pay was low, the hours were bad, but I knew I needed to be there, partly to be trained better as an editor and as a writer, and started there, and a year went by, then another year went by, and I was waiting for that opening. That was just, we had moved to Ogden. We were from Springville, the Provo area, and so it really wasn't that far from home, but it felt like that we couldn't just visit the family often. And so that patience, waiting for that opportunity, and then ironically, or I don't know, just strangely, I left the journalism world to become a cemetery sexton, and I had worked part-time during college at the cemetery. But
grave digger.
I suppose you'd call that liberating, to leave journalism to dig graves. But that actually is what opened up the way.
This is absolutely sickening. Absolutely sickening when you look at what happened from here, and where the bodies of those two children were found. on his property. But there is so much more before that, and we'll get to it. And it'll probably take us all the way through to January. It probably will, by the time we even get to that stage.
For me to be able to write books, because as a journalist, I was, at a computer 8 hours a day, and when I got home, the last thing I wanted to do was to write anything. I just did not want to get back on the computer. But the cemetery job was the opposite, where you're out either mowing the lawn or weed eating or helping people find graves or digging graves. That by the time I got home, it was time to kind of shift gears and just focus on writing. And it let me. Another great part of that job was I was able to just ponder as I worked in the cemetery. Crazy place.
Plenty of time for that.
So that was liberating for me. That changed my direction in life. If I had stayed in the newspaper business, I would have burned out, and I never would have written books.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned, kind of change your focus. Like this thing I'm doing now, this podcast, for a long time, and I was actually kind of mentioned this whole principle that I'll mention here with a friend I was talking to last night here at the hospital in our ward here from church, and mentioning that for the longest time, I was trying to get into things like web design. I loved computer programming, and then that didn't work. I got a few clients that tried my own business, and that just wasn't working. So I said, okay, I'll try the only other thing I'm really good at. It was just piano and music and composition and stuff. And I found out later that the Lord was like, well, neither of those endeavors were wrong. They weren't bad things to try, but they were not what I wanted you to do. It's like he was saying to me at some point. So,
do you know what I wonder? This guy is probably perfectly normal. The guy interviewing him. I wonder if this haunts him. If it plays on his mind that there was this guy seemingly relatively normal, with these self-help, healing, religion-based philosophy kind of books, because that's kind of what he thought he was. I wonder how he feels now. He must feel so sick to his stomach. The ripple effect of the damage of what these two got up to is just, you can't even imagine it. It's so bad.
Those are things you
That's without the monumental trail of dead bodies behind them.
already knew. So in a way, kind of getting me into blogging and podcasting was his way of saying, you have Asperger's syndrome. You know that communication is your weakness. So focus on that. Go and just sink or swim. Just do it. And it's the lady who was talking to me last night in Larry's hospital room was saying, just the way you talk about what you're doing now, you're glowing about it. It seems like you feel more free. Everything to do with it, and I'm with your change of focus, that kind of did that for you. The same thing for me. So I kind of relate to that. It's like Lord says, well, maybe you should go this direction. It's like, oh, this is so much better.
Yeah, that's where, like you said, with sports, baseball, it was just nice to switch gears. The Lord does switch up things in our lives every once in a while, and
if you
helps us grow and develop.
You learn to trust Him and have patience in that process. When I first started blogging, I read the first one maybe 2 years after I started. I'm like, that's horrible. I suck at this. And then, I realized, wait a minute, I did it, and I sucked at it, and I did it more, and I sucked less at it. So it's patience, I guess, pays off there a bit. So, awesome. So next thing here, for listeners who aren't members of our church, I mentioned this in previous episodes once in a while, but there's a missionary manual called Preach My Gospel. And for you, Chad, patience is listed in that manual as one of the Christ-like attributes that we're supposed to develop. So could you talk a little bit about the specific ways the Lord has taught you how to develop that Christ-like attribute? It could be just general or specific, either way.
Okay. It just feels like I just turned 50, It feels like for 50 years, it's been an uphill climb. There's been very few stretches where I've been able to coast at all. It's just steady uphill. And with the books, my dad was a still worker. My mother was a school aide. No one had ever heard of the Daybells before, really, except when they went to prison or something like that.
Wow.
So I didn't really have any structure on becoming a writer.
This is absolutely crazy because I think he's 53 or 54 now. So this was so close to when things went so horrifically bad for everybody involved. Whoa. And he's in prison. Don't ever let him out.
Or anything, and just had to have faith. My dad was so supportive. He'd show me articles of people that, they got rejected 21 times before their book got published, that kind of stuff,
It's funny you mentioned that. I have a question for you that you mentioned being rejected. I'm going to have to ask you something about this podcast about a writing project I was working on a while back, but go ahead, sorry.
Okay. But luckily, I did get accepted on my second try, and just writing became a test of patience, because I honestly felt like the Lord had me on a time schedule. I knew my first series should have 5 volumes, my first major series, and he'd say, stop for a while, it's not time, and to release the book, and I was on the Lord's errand, I feel, with those books to just help explain. So what those books are about are tied to that near-death experience where Grandpa showed me the various scenes coming up. No. So as I write the books, those...
Oh my God. So at this stage, if everything was mapped out and he'd seen it all, from nearly drowning himself for a second time, did he actually know where the end game of this, where this was going to lead? This is so crazy, so awful.
Scenes are downloaded into my mind, and I remember them.
I remember.
And so many people got pulled into this. So many people who prior to that had just been normal people who'd been married for years. There was divorces, there was very speedy marriages, there was just so much. There's so many side characters in this.
When you're talking about this specific part on the podcast I listened to you for, the time to wire you up, I remember you saying something about that. Some of them were like you kind of had to almost weave them into a fictional world and make it more kind of a symbolic, and then, oh, by the way, here's the real story behind that when people ask, kind of thing, right?
Yes, for years I never said that the origin of the books were a vision or a near-death experience. It was just based on the scriptures and on prophetic quotes and all that. Cool. And the books do weave those in as well. But I felt guided in creating a storyline. I wouldn't say it's an alternate universe, it's a future universe that I think could still come to pass. Yeah. So, based on my own children, they've made other choices that have actually shifted that timeline a little bit, but for the most part, they are coming to pass as I was shown. So,
awesome. That's really cool.
So what does this mean? His kids were kicking back from this mad brainwashing? Well, good for them, because his kids are still alive. Other people's aren't, though.
One of the things I love, though, I wanted to mention too for this episode is I love what and any thoughts you have about this are totally welcome too from your experience. I love what the oath and covenant of the priesthood teaches about patience. And for non-member listeners today, that's basically kind of like a scriptural outline of what God expects of us in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what expects of priesthood holders, the basically ways to righteously exercise.
Right, sorry, the image that you're seeing here is actually Laurie Vallow's brother. He's dead, but he's a side character. He's a whole different ball game. He's probably about 3 of these, all by himself. This is a lot. All of it is going to be a lot. Not for the faint-hearted, this one.
That priesthood authority as Heavenly Father directs. And there's a few things here. I'm actually going to kind of go through a few verses of what it talks about in what we call Doctrine and Covenants in section 121, where it says, no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by, not forcing on anyone, right? Only by persuasion.
Okay, this is a picture of him with his first wife. She's dead.
By long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul, without hypocrisy and without guile, reproving, or reprimanding, you could say, betimes with sharpness, when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then showing forth afterwards an increase of love toward him whom thou hast reproved, lest he esteem thee to be thine enemy. And I always felt like if there was one word that could encompass each of those parts of that counsel, it would be patience. Like, knowing proper restraint, right?
Right.
Well, Chad could have really done with that, couldn't he? Rather than what actually transpired in the end.
Well, there was a little bit more of a disciplinarian.
A bully? Was you a bully?
Most. And didn't exercise patience a lot. I think partly it was because of his job as a steel worker, just a tough environment. Often brought that home. But it did.
Okay, he's talking about his father. Okay. So he wasn't very patient. So what was he? An angry man who used to bring all of this home. And then what used to happen? What's going on here?
Caused me to want to be a different type of parent, more loving and understanding. And I've used those verses as the guide to my life often, to just be able to love and see the perspective of the child or whoever I'm dealing with.
Oh, this is sickening considering what happened. Ugh, you vile creature.
The cemetery sexton, that was a key part of it. Was most people...
Yep, training to dig graves in your own garden. Yep, great training ground.
Don't care about the cemetery unless there's a problem. And so, it's like their flowers were missing or somebody stole something off the grave. So it was a great lesson in how to deal with people and to follow that guidance there in Doctrine and Covenants 120.
There's a scene I can't wait for in January. There's just been another hearing recently, but that's with his other half, Laurie Vallow. Yeah, this is where we like to see him in the court. Roll on next year, get that trial out the way, and then let's never see his revolting face again.
And to serve my fellow men, I felt. As I mentioned in my biography, I have been a scoutmaster 4 times. I think I became more patient each time. The first time, I was a little more strict with the boys and didn't enjoy it like I should. But as I got older and my own children became involved,
2 of his victims, these are the children, found in his garden. Wonderful scout leader.
Learned how to be a better person. And it makes for a happier life to be patient and kind and loving.
That's his
and
garden.
I've just observed those that cannot ever implement those traits.
And that is Laurie's brother again, who's dead, but was culpable for killing someone else.
Into their lives, they just aren't happy. I think the key to happiness are those verses you read right there.
Well, my wife's been so good at that too. We've been married for 10 years last month, and a number of times I could say where she's, not only is she not usually the confrontational type, when someone comes to her and wants to, talk about something that's uncomfortable for her anyways, she'll very calmly say, something like, you know what, this isn't the time to talk about this, which sometimes certain people I have to be like, by the way, for my wife, that's translations for, shut up, I'm not ready for this. She's just saying it nicely.
Yes.
And to my discredit, I should have been this impatient with one person who actually came into the house, and one time I was trying to convince her to do something she didn't want to do, and she's actually getting a little teary-eyed, and she's like, can we stop talking about this? And
Oh, great. So he was, so the interviewer as well, he had a woman in tears because he was trying to bully her into something or have a view that he wanted her to have, and she wasn't ready for it. Wonderful.
Her patient way of handling it as usual, and I said to the person, you know what, that's translation for shut your pie hole. I was upset. I was not patient there, but she's always been a good example to me for that. And what you said there about kind of learning in the first part about learning, this is how I don't want to live, how I don't want to be. And let's do the other way. From the abuse she faced growing up, she taught me, she saw that and she became better instead of bitter. And the kind of the same thing you were mentioning there. She learned that's how I don't want to be, and so she turned out the other way. She's very patient with people who mistreat her or sometimes even just ignore her or don't feel, maybe she doesn't feel like they're listening. She doesn't doesn't confront them about it. So if she really wants something done, she'll ask me, hey, could you put on your Rottweiler hat but be nice about it, So I'm the one that does that for her, and I don't mind looking like the bad guy sometimes if I have to, but I try to follow her example and being confrontational when she asks me to, but just kind of what your approach there was. I'm still learning, so. Anyways, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, one second here. Okay. I think that's still there. Yeah, okay. For those who might be listening today who are going through, maybe similar to me or to you, through trial that just seems to have no end. I mean, that relates directly to me at least. Or perhaps maybe they're having a hard time waiting on the Lord for years for an answer to prayer or understanding. Maybe how to deal with a difficult person in their life with patience. What suggestions might you have for those who are going through that kind of thing with really long-term trial to help them find patience through that process?
Well, I do believe in enduring to the end, to just stick it out. It's hard at times to do that, to not get discouraged, just to have an overall positive view. You almost have to take it an hour at a time sometimes.
What utter garbage. He was the person who was seeing people and the zombie apocalypse was coming, and he was grading people because he was the prophet, the second coming of Jesus. Oh my God. Wow. And at this stage, you know exactly what his plan was. You know, he must have known. What a liar.
And just look for opportunities. I try to, small things, eat a Snickers bar or something like that, just to help through
That'll put me off of Snickers for the rest of my life.
The stress that comes. But that was one part about the cemetery work that I started the first time when I was 27 years old, and that looked like a long time to be working in a cemetery, retire at age 65. It's almost like work there for 40 years and then die and then be there permanently. But I just did not like the thought of working there forever. And so the Lord has opened up other avenues, but sometimes it is a lifelong quest. Gratefully, my children have had good health, and it sounds like your wife has suffered some health issues, and that is, to me, one of the greatest challenges is to just daily serve others who are having health issues.
God. Yeah, he was so good at helping those preserve their health issues. Some of them aren't here anymore by his hand.
Just that constant,
allegedly.
Never-ending stress.
Yeah.
You love them, of course, but it is a challenge, and sometimes you ask the Lord, why did I end up in this situation? I believe that we did agree to a lot of our trials in life before we were born.
Yeah.
And it sure seemed a lot easier then, I think, to agree to some of this.
It's funny because, let me see here. One of the things that my wife was actually, she had wondered for years. Like, she always thought, I've always needed help with something in my life to get something done. I've always needed a friend to help me pull through things, and it makes sense with all the abuse and stuff she's been through. But so when she joined the church, she learned about the pre-existence, about we were spirits with Heavenly Father before this life, right? She wondered for the longest time, was I one of those people who had to be kicked, like dragged, kicking and screaming, down to earth? Or was I one of those who was more valiant? When I was how allegiant was I to the plan, right? And because I was getting help here, what was it like? And so one day she received a blessing. I feel like the Spirit's giving me permission to talk about this, but she got a blessing.
God, I feel sorry for this guy's wife. He's just spilling all of her business. But she's really chuffed about this now.
The person giving it didn't know anything about this, and he said...
Right, I mean, I know it's not his fault because he didn't really know what was going to happen, but honestly...
in the previous life, you rejoiced and looked forward with great anticipation, knowing what you would face in this life, and you were overjoyed at the opportunity of going through those things to become like your heavenly parents. And she, afterward, both her and I was discussing that, and she's like, okay, I wanted this. Interesting. It looks like I only have the quote-unquote intellectual bookwork behind that one, obviously.
Right. Well, that's why we're here on Earth, to experience what we had learned about there, and just we had to go through it, experience physical pain, emotional pain, so many...
And the rest of our lives behind bars, with any hope. With any hope. They're all going to blame each other. In fact, actually, we'll get into, I'm digressing a little bit. I think what they're going to do is everyone's going to blame Laurie Vallow's brother. I think they're going to blame him. Won't wash. It's not going to wash. But for any defence lawyer, I guess that's really all you've got. That's all you've got. Blame each other or blame the person who's no longer here.
Trials, but it is truly refining us and shaping us, and that is the underlying basis of patience, is the refining process. That if everything just ended and happened right as we expected it, back to my books, if we expected the future just to piece together just as we had envisioned it, what would be the challenge in that?
Oh boy, I could talk about that for a while too, but... No, my mission.
That's where the enduring to the end comes in.
Yeah, my mission, I had everything all planned out the rest of my life. I thought I did, detail for almost flawless detail, a lot of the main things, and I got off my mission. The Lord was like, okay, let's turn you really fast this way. No, you go on the wrong, you changed everything.
Yep.
And it's funny, I also like that you mentioned, just to wrap up here, I like that you mentioned the whole, take one situation at a time thing, eat a Snickers bar, whatever. Because I remember asking, which member of the 70 was it, in the General Authority 70s for church, he was doing a fireside in our stake here up here in Hamilton, and this was just a few years after Leanne and I got married, and I was wondering, how do I really know where my standing is before the Lord? Am I being patient enough? Am I doing things from day to day all right? How do I know this, right? Where am I standing? Didn't really feel like I had a grasp on, how do I know if I'm doing enough now on the right path? And So I asked him this question afterwards. I kind of went up to the stand, and my wife's like, wait till afterwards if you can catch him on the way out. There's a lot of people here who want to ask questions. They have time limits. So I caught him on the way out, when he was coming off the podium. And I asked him that question, like, how do I know, if I'm on the right track? Like, sometimes I don't know,
Sorry about this audio.
How close am I? How far am I? Because I'm not, having the farthest perspective is objective and mine's not. So he actually mentioned the Preach My Gospel manual I mentioned earlier, and he's like, another chapter about time management. And like, yeah, and I had actually hadn't looked at that. They're probably going to help me get through tonight, well, the way my wife is right now. It's
Right, that's pretty much it. I guess you get the gist of it. So Chad Daybell thought he was some sort of prophet. Wrote a load of books. Was part of the Latter-day Saints Church. Goes on and on. He eventually ends up like sort of kicked out because of his beliefs. Yeah, that's enough. That's 40 odd minutes. That's enough. This is heavy stuff, all of this. Next part of this is going to be where he's basically a cult leader on the road. One of his talks, and I'll do that when I've got the stomach for it. I'll try and get one of these out at least once a week, because we won't get to where we are now with this by the time the trial starts. And because it's so complex and convoluted when the trial starts, unless you actually have been looking at this I've been looking at this forever now. How this all came about is not going to make that much sense, because there's going to be so many characters and they're all going to be covering their own backs. So anyway, look after your lovely selves. This might not be for everyone. I'm sensitive to that, so just don't watch it, don't listen to it if this is a little bit too much, because it will be for a lot of people. So I always try and sort of like mix the channel up a little bit with sort of like just random stuff. The reason that this is important, it was important to me when this case first came around, which was a couple of years ago now, is because of the behaviour of people like John Wedger, Jeanette Archer, Wayne Fox, and how badly this can go. Like most cults do, it doesn't end up good, doesn't end up with a happy ending for anybody. So, right, look after your lovely selves. It's a little dog coming back from the park. See, looks like I'm still here. I'm excited. I'm going to the park. So, apologies for that. Again, I've got the windows open here. So, look after yourselves, and I'll catch you again soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.